The special meeting of Tuesday, March 8th. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Vice Mayor Koo? Here. Councilmember Cormack? Here. Councilmember Du Bois?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. Next, we'll have oral communications where members of the public may address this committee on any items not on our agenda. Again, today's agenda includes contract extension and terms with Baker Tilly for City Auditor Services. Members of the public may raise their hand in the Zoom application. If you wish to address the Council Appointed Officers Committee, we'll pause briefly for the clerk to see if anyone wishes to do so.
Chair Cormack, I see no hands raised.
All right, and that moves us to our agenda item today. Again, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing and providing direction on the contract extension and terms with Baker Tilly for City Auditor Services. And I think the way we'll do this is first we'll hear from Director Nosey. Then we'll see if there are any comments from the public. I'm going to make a few brief statements and then we'll turn to our City Auditor, Kyle O'Rourke. And at that point, we will return to the committee for discussion and direction. Director Nosey.
Thank you, Chair Cormack. Good afternoon. Kylie Nosey, Administrative Services Director. And I have an echo, so give me one moment. I think there's sound on this. Okay. This afternoon, we are here to discuss the current contract with Baker Tilly for City Auditor Services. This was completed through a public procurement process that actually the former CAO committee reviewed about 18 months ago. So the contract expires at the end of this fiscal year in June of 2022. And so ultimately, as a council appointed officer, this contract and ultimately the appointment of Mr. O'Rourke as the city auditor are up for this committee's review and recommendation to the full city council. So I would, my recommendation to this committee today would be to discuss this contract. And what we've done in the past is appoint someone, typically the chair or someone from this commission or committee, I'm sorry, to iron out the details in terms of the contract details, depending on your choices in terms of, do we want to extend the contract? Do we want to go out for another public solicitation or the like? And then that person can work with me and my procurement staff to actually do the contract execution for full council's, or the next steps, I should say, for full council's review. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair and we are here to help.
Thank you, Director Nosey. And now we'll turn to members of the public who may wish to address us on the contract extension and terms for the city auditor. Again, there isn't anyone in chambers, so members of the public may raise their hand in Zoom if they'd like to address us.
There are no requests to speak.
Thank you so much to the clerk. Okay, so I just want to make a few brief comments before we give Mr. O'Rourke a chance to share his thoughts on any changes that we might consider making. You know, we spent so much time on this a couple years ago, really thoughtful process. Personally, I've been pretty impressed with the quality, quantity, and thoroughness of the work. So far, Policy and Services will be reviewing a number of audits this evening at 7, and those are publicly available. So I'm going to be interested in considering the full 3-year extension. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and invite Mr. O'Rourke to share any thoughts he has about the current contract and what a 3-year extension might look like.
Great. Thanks so much, Chair Cormack. Good afternoon, everyone. Kyle O'Rourke, City Auditor. On behalf of myself and Baker Tilly, I wanted to thank everyone and just note that it's been a pleasure to serve the city for the last 1.5 years, and we hope to have the opportunity to continue to do so. We've served the city for roughly 15 months at this point. I think you're likely familiar with a lot of our work. Generally, we've delivered, we will have delivered roughly 8 or 9 audit activities this past fiscal year. So we've really ramped up the amount of work that's coming out of the office. And I hope you would agree that we brought some stability that you might have been seeking over the last couple of years. In terms of contract changes, I just really have what I would consider some minor suggestions. The first really is relatively specific, and it deals with rates. Our suggestion or our ask really would be to increase rates in the first year of the next year as we serve the city. So that is the 3-year term that Council Member Cormack is suggesting, just that first year, by a modest amount of roughly 5%. And in recognition of where that puts us in terms of rates, we'd be willing as a firm to keep our rate structure flat for the years to come after that. So a rate increase in the first year in recognition of cost of living adjustments, inflation, covering the costs that we're incurring as a firm, and then remain constant from there is sort of the ask in terms of rates. One other item, and this is sort of a, I can put this out there for discussion. I have a recommendation of my own, and I'll state what that is, but open to discussion around it. One of the contract terms is to have a peer review conducted by the Association of Local Government Auditors. We have been in contact with them, and they are, due to COVID, months and months behind. So the earliest they could conduct a peer review would be in November of 2022. So 9 roughly months from now. Alternatively, an option would be to conduct it at the end of next fiscal year, which would actually put us on what would be considered best practice or the normal cycle of peer reviews, and that would be conducting one every 3 years. So that's an option. ALGA won't be able to complete it this fiscal year, so a change sort of needs to be made. And then lastly, really, this isn't even a contractual item, but something I want to mention. Tonight, we'll be presenting to Policy and Services the risk assessment results, as well as an audit plan that covers the remainder of this fiscal year and next fiscal year. Our contract doesn't specify the time period at which those risk assessment and audit plans are to be completed, but our intent moving forward would be to complete those within the last quarter of each fiscal year to lay out a plan for the following fiscal year. So the risk assessment that's budgeted for in FY23 would be conducted in quarter 4 of FY23 and would cover the period of FY24. So I threw a lot of fiscal years and quarters out there, but the intent would be to line up those activities to the end of the year. That doesn't specifically require a contract change of any sort, but would better align to the fiscal year, which is something that we'd suggest. So those were sort of the 3 items I wanted to mention right now. Happy to, I'll be here and happy to answer any other questions that you all might have, but look forward to the conversation, and hopefully we have the opportunity to continue to serve.
Thanks so much, Mr. O'Rourke. And now I'll turn to my colleagues. We can be relatively informal. You can raise a virtual hand, a regular hand, or press your button. Who'd like to go first? Vice Mayor Koo.
Thank you. I was just wondering, I didn't catch the last 2 recommendations by Mr. O'Rourke. So can I have you come back and repeat those?
Yes, no problem. The second of 3 items that I mentioned, hopefully I have these in the correct order. I mentioned rate increases.
No.
The second item was the peer review. I guess I'm suggesting that we change the timing of that. No matter what, we have to change it to November. The best practice, and actually what ALGA recommended when we chatted with them, was to conduct it at the end of the 3rd year, which would actually be 15 months or so from now, May of 2023. So summary statement, changing the timing of the peer review. And then item number 3 was really just, we plan to change the timing of the risk assessment, not a contractual change, just something I wanted to mention that we plan to do if we were to continue to serve the city.
And so with that 3rd one, the risk assessment is what you're asking for, is so that you can assess the fiscal year.
Yeah, so I guess in the ideal world, the audit plan would line up directly with the fiscal year.
Okay.
So for us would run July 1st through June 30th. And so the risk assessment then would immediately precede the approval of the plan. So we'd have it approved in May or June to be sort of operationalized beginning immediately in the fiscal year.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councilmember Du Bois.
So just a couple of questions for Kylie. So what is the requirement to do an RFP? Like, if we're happy, is there a limit to how many years we can go?
It depends on the situation. In this contract specifically, the contract outlines up to a 3-year term extension. So under the existing RFP that was completed and with the current contract terms negotiated and executed, the committee, if desired, wants to extend this contract based on the terms, can extend no more than 3 years. After that point, we would then do typically a public process thereafter. However, of course, the council may choose a different path as well.
So we can extend once for the length of the original contract, but could we extend again for another 3 years, 3 years from now?
After, if the committee and the council choose to extend and exercise this first 3-year extension, we would then go into a contract close at the end of that additional 3-year term. At that point, the council and this committee could choose to either, one, continue services with Baker Tilly, negotiate a contract, a new contract, frankly, and execute it, or go through a solicitation process.
Okay.
Typically, I will say, after anywhere between 5 to 10 years, depending on the life cycle of, is it a software and what's the implementation timeline, we do try to rebid things to obviously test the market for prices and the like. But there are other instances where we will do market evaluation and choose to go a different path rather than a formal solicitation.
Okay. Yeah, it's just helpful to understand. I mean, this has been working well. It's kind of an ongoing situation, and obviously a lot of knowledge. Baker Tilly will develop a lot of knowledge over the years. So I guess there's no such concept of like an auto renewal in a city contract.
No.
Okay. And just, I don't know if you know offhand, how does the annual rate compare to what our in-house costs used to be?
Ooh, that I don't have off of hand. I can say that the annual cost of our former office was over 1 million.
Okay.
And this contract has a not to exceed of 750,000 for a full fiscal year. So again, different structures, different productivity, et cetera, but just some gauges.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And then Kyle or Kylie, I guess, thanks for reminding me. So, we see the price table there, but we are being billed hourly up to those amounts, right? Yep. Okay. And, I mean, the peer review, that sounds reasonable. Push that out once every 3 years. I think it would be good I don't know if it's in this process, but to have some performance KPIs, like the questions I was asking, just over the years. I don't know, how many audits are we getting per audit hour? We tried to do that when we had an in-house auditing team. So, and I guess a couple of my questions have to do with, now that we're up and running, do we still need to do all of these task items each and every year? So it sounds like you want to do the risk assessment every year. I guess one question I had was, would it make sense to do it every 24 months? If we start to develop a pretty big backlog of audits. Kyle, what's your thoughts on that?
On the risk assessment itself, I do recommend having some form of a risk assessment completed annually. And as an example, in our first year, we did a risk assessment and audit plan, I believe in total for roughly $80,000, which equates to 400 or 450 hours of our labor. That's pretty typical for year one in an engagement like this. How we like to proceed from there is sort of every other year doing not quite as large of a risk assessment, but I would say moderately sized risk assessment process intermixed with a smaller risk assessment, more of a refresh, which is what we did this year for roughly, I want to say 20,000. So a quarter of the cost. We did a refresh. We made sure we talked to the key people and then updated the audit plan accordingly. So kind of going back and forth, I suppose, is what my suggestion is moving forward.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I was looking at packet page 21, and assuming that the next 3 years would look like the last year, but it sounds like it would vary kind of every other year, is what you're saying.
I'm working to package page 21. Sorry, I was looking at the actual contract itself.
Okay. Well, that is the contract. That's Exhibit B, compensation. So I was kind of looking at it like FY 2020 was the onboarding year, and then all the future years would be roughly the same. So are the next 3 years going to be, you know, roughly the 750,000 plus maybe 5%?
So I don't want to further overcomplicate this, but our contract for this fiscal year is 750,000. In recognition, of budget challenges the city was facing last fiscal year, the city auditor's office sort of participated, so to speak, in the 10% budget cuts. So our contract is for 750, but our budget is for 675. And we essentially then generate work orders knowing that the total not to exceed is 675. So we would never get to the contract total. So that just wanted to make sure that was clear.
So are we talking about the next 3 years being 675 plus 5%?
Yes, I do believe that's the case. So you sort of started with a broader question of what could or should future years look like. I'm happy to kind of go into some of these other tasks if that would be helpful.
Well, the other one that, like choosing the financial auditor, do we start from scratch on that every year? Like, do we need to pay?
We do not. So I think Councilmember Du Bois, what you're hitting on is essentially in Exhibit B, what you're referencing, the budget schedule and the task orders. We would need to update this Exhibit B, both this schedule as well as the schedule of rates, which is Exhibit B-1. So packet page 21 and 23 in the contract. What I would recommend is, like I said, deputizing one of you as the liaison to work out the final details with Mr. O'Rourke and Baker Tilly from a negotiation standpoint, with broad authority and or direction, obviously, from this committee in totality to, work through what your expectations are. And that way we can work through little seasonality changes like you're noting. The evaluation and benchmarking isn't going to be an annual thing. As Mr. O'Rourke said, there's a recommendation for that to be every 3 years. So you'll see that ebb and flow over the course of the 6-year term. Same thing with, like you mentioned, the selection of the external financial auditor. We're doing a multi-year contract for that. So this year we did a full RFP with Mr. O'Rourke. And so that we can work together with one of you, if that's your pleasure, to figure out those details with Mr. O'Rourke for the final contract documentation.
Or it sounds like we could just say we're buying a bunch of hours up to whatever 675 times an extra 5% is, right? And then we're going to just work through the work plan annually, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're doing.
We are, and ultimately the contract is set up by task order and deliberately so that as we can move and adjust to the needs of the organization and the direction of the council and the Policy and Services Committee, the PNS chair is actually deputized to sign off on task orders as we move through.
Cool. Okay, cool. So thank you. That's very helpful. Supportive and renewing for the maximum amount of time.
Okay, any other questions from either of my colleagues? No? All right, then why don't we go ahead and I'll just go ahead and make a motion, and Director Nozay, you can help to make sure we've captured everything. So I will move that we direct staff to extend the contract with Baker Tilly for city auditor services for 3 years. And I think I will, let's include in there that sort of like an A underneath there. So I'll let the clerk catch up. Include appropriate metrics and KPIs.
Yeah, I don't know when is the appropriate time. Like, is that at the end of the contract?
Why don't we say consider including appropriate metrics and APIs, and, that way we can have
Annually or
a
something.
conversation, presumably I can have a conversation with Kyle about that, about what might make sense. Okay, what else did I have written down? B would be move the peer review to the end of fiscal year 2023.
I think it would be C would be like an annual
Sorry,
amount.
just a minute. If the clerk could say 2023. Okay, and then, sorry, what were you going to say with C?
I think it would be for an annual amount not to exceed 709,000. I think that's.
Is that 675 times 1.05?
I think
Someone's
so.
doing math.
Somebody
Okay.
checks my math.
Yeah, sure. We'll put that in, not to exceed. I will wait till Director Nozay gives us the right number.
It would technically be 708,750.
Yeah, I rounded.
Well, why don't we just say 709,000 for the time being, and we'll sort that out. Which was a pretty good deal, since a couple years ago we were willing to pay 750. And then I think where would be the best place, Director Nozay, to nominate someone to be the negotiator?
I think just appointing one of you, so under, I guess, not to exceed 709 and include, and C, identify blank to negotiate details of contract terms.
Okay, so delegate or?
Yep.
And do we need the council to do that, or can we do that ourselves here?
You can do that
You can
yourself,
do
sir.
it. So I would nominate you if you're willing to do it.
I accept. Okay. All right, so let's put Cormac to negotiate details of contract terms. All right, so let's pause for a moment and see if there's a second.
Well, I think we should add D, that annual amount.
Oh, yeah, I
it's up
said
there.
that,
Never
didn't I?
mind, it's up in the top.
Okay,
If I may, excuse me. Hi, Cassie Coleman, City
Yeah.
Attorney's Office. If we could change identify to designate,
certainly.
super. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms.
Cassie.
Coleman. I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Koo, I missed something you said there. You need the microphone.
I think Mr. O'Rourke also mentioned risk assessment. Do we need to add that into a contract?
I
or-
don't think
You
so,
don't think
because
so?
he said it's not in the contract.
But he's going to do the change himself. Okay,
Yeah, and I think he needs to do that with the Chair of Policy and Services.
I see. All
Okay,
right.
but
Thank
I
you.
think he flagged it for us, which is helpful. Thank you for the
Right.
reminder.
It'll
I'll
be-
try to remember it at 7.
It'll be part of the task order in C, right?
I don't think it's in the contract when we do the risk assessment.
That's
right.
correct. It will be
So,
designated by Policy and Services as a task order, a separate task order authorized under this contract.
okay, and does staff have any other suggestions before I seek a second?
I don't believe so. A few clarifying points, I think, understanding on how staff would operationalize this with Councilmember Cormac. We would envision, at least from an expedited process standpoint, we would work with Councilmember Cormac as well as Baker Tilly and our procurement and legal on an amendment to the Baker Tilly contract, and then bring that forward as part of this committee's recommendation to the full council. So it's a one stop as part of the consent calendar, assuming that this committee approves it unanimously.
Okay,
That would be staff's interpretation of this and next steps.
all right. So in the event that we approve this unanimously, I will go do some work with the appropriate staff, and then it will be presumably on the consent calendar for council.
That is correct.
All right, let's see if I have a second. Thank you, Vice Mayor Koo. All right, I do want to speak just briefly to this because we've leapt into the details, and I addressed it earlier, but I think this has been an excellent development for the city in terms of the level of professional advice we are receiving, really in just about every area, and it's certainly been a pleasure to work with Mr. O'Rourke and his team. So I'm pleased on every level. And I will just say one thing about the pricing. in the event this, might be relevant for a staff report to full council. We do have the task orders, and in the event there is some, concern about spending even the $709,000, we will be able to ratchet that over time should that be necessary or desired. The only alternative, if we felt we needed to reduce this, would be to do fewer audits. And we're doing about 8 a year. And I don't personally feel we're yet at the time we can decide, okay, we've worked through our backlog, or we have such a much better understanding. So I just want to lay that out there in terms of making sure our colleagues understand what the other options are, and that we're not, just rubber stamping something that came through. So
Just to
can
clarify.
we just get her to speak to her
Oh,
second?
sorry.
Vice Mayor Ku, any thoughts on your second?
Well, I concur with most of what you said. I believe, we've been quite satisfied and happy with Mr. O'Rourke and his team. So happily seconded it.
Thank you. And Councilmember Du Bois.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think it was clear. Sorry.
No worries, take your time.
My real thought there was really getting to the ROI. And again, as this contract gets older and older, I just think it'd be good practice. It'll be good for us. It'll be good for Baker Tilly to just have some kind of summary again of, like you said, 8 audits a year for X dollars, whatever it is, just so we have some metrics. And, if we're ever in the future being asked about why are we doing this, that's what I was
And I
proposing.
think that, and it may not be that we end up including it in the contract itself. It may just be part of a discussion, maybe more appropriate with the chair of policy and services, but I'm glad you brought it up, and no harm in putting it here. It may or may not make its way into the contract. All right, let me just offer Mr. O'Rourke a moment, since the rest of our staff nodded and I can't necessarily see if he's nodding. Mr. O'Rourke, any thoughts on this before we move forward with the vote?
I'm also nodding, and the KPIs, I think I've got some good ideas. So rest assured, we'll work on that, and we'll likely incorporate those into our quarterly reports, which are part of the contract. So directly or indirectly included in the contract, they'll be there.
Okay, that makes a lot of
Appreciate
sense.
the conversation.
Yeah, and let me just say on behalf of the city, I appreciate Baker Tilly's willingness to keep the rates flat in the out years. Certainly appreciate that. All right, well, let's go ahead and vote. Oh, wow, I actually have the clerk can run the vote. The clerk, please call for the vote.
Chair Cormac,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Du Bois,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to our staff for being here today. Those of you who came in person and those of you online, big thanks to Mr. O'Rourke and the staff at Baker Tilly, as we have managed to onboard you during a pandemic, which, is no small feat. Thanks to my colleagues, and we're adjourned.
See you, Kyle.
Thank you.